Hi, Lauren here. Wanted to give a heads up to our listeners that the topic of sexual assault, specifically sexual assault against a minor, is referenced in this episode. So if these are difficult topics for you, you might want to go ahead and skip. If you are a victim of sexual assault and are based in the United States, you can contact the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800 656 4673. Welcome to Who Are You, a CSI podcast. I am Lauren, and I've seen CSI through and through around 3 to 4 times.
And I'm Nick, and this is my first time experiencing these episodes.
And today we are reviewing Season 2, Episode 15, Burden of Proof. Original air date is February 7th, 2002. Director is Kenneth Fink. Writers are Anthony E. Zeiker and Anne Donahue. Before we begin, I am dealing with a cold this week, listeners, so I apologize that I'm probably going to sound nasally on this recording. We pushed this recording back in hopes that I would feel better, and I do feel better, but I'm definitely not 100%. So I apologize if my voice is a little nasally for this episode.
It makes a good radio voice, you know. You get
the deep.
Yeah, like classic album-oriented rock station.
Yeah. So trust me, not doing this on purpose. I've been taking a lot of cold medication to try to combat this. But we begin the episode with shots of the Vegas Strip, and then kind of we go over like the burbs around Vegas, and then we pan over the desert, and then we end up at what we learn to be the body farm. But before we get there, Nick, what is our Vegas score for today's episode?
We have a 22. We do have a mid-show scene as well.
Yeah,
right towards the end, really, not really.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, whoa, another Vegas scene.
Yeah,
sometimes I'm like, I hope I didn't miss another one between the beginning and this.
The few times that you have said this, I have not heard from our listeners via social media that you missed one. But again, listeners, let us know. Yeah.
They used to do it like, if they were doing it mid, they used to do like a bunch of them because it seemed like it was filler.
Yeah.
And so now I've sort of like trained in my brain. So then like the second watch through, I'll be like super like, gotta make sure I pay attention. Gotta focus. And then like I'll forget. And when we go back, that scene will come up again. I'm like, oh, I couldn't have missed it twice. It would have reminded
you're like,
me.
I would have picked up on this.
I would have had that feeling again.
Yeah. So I guess, I'm not surprised. This isn't really a Vegas heavy episode. That's really just not the focus of this episode. Is just not on Vegas.
I will say there's a scene in Grissom's apartment towards the end of the episode. And I was trying to figure out if he's on the Vegas Strip. Like, you can't really see out the window super well, but it kind of looks like they've tried to make it look like his like apartment overlooks the Vegas Strip. And I was like, I'll have to keep an eye on that.
Grissom makes more money. Grissom makes more money than I thought he did. Mm-hmm. So
I just got in super early before the housing bubble.
Yeah. Speaking of Grissom, we see Grissom walking through the woods at night. He comes across a body. He continues walking. He finds an abandoned truck housing another body. He then approaches a third body, and as he's examining or kind of just looking at the third body, somebody approaches him and says, "This one is not ours." Which brings us to...
I on the second body was like, is this one of those places where they put bodies to see how they decay?
Yeah, it's a body
I can't remember if it's another TV show I watched or like a news segment, like an old like History Channel thing or something.
This is a legitimate thing, listeners. Yeah. So if you don't, you probably know, but if you don't, body farms are legitimate scientific experiments, basically, where people can donate. And I've debated donating my body to this or like a teaching hospital or something like that, because I don't need to be buried. So and then if you're gonna cremate me afterwards, that's fine. At least like my body, you got some use out of it before you cremated it. Yeah. So I've debated doing this, like donating my body to a body farm or to like a teaching hospital or something along those lines. But yeah, body farms are legitimate scientific endeavors where they study, as Grissom points out at some point in the episode, like rate of decay and things of that nature, right? So to get the timeline of bugs' arrival and things of that nature. Yeah. So this is a legitimate thing. This is not cooked up for CSI. These do exist.
Yeah. The thing I remember is like they'll put them in different like situations. So partially buried, fully buried, in the water,
yep.
in a bush, in direct sunlight, not in direct sunlight.
Yep.
And they'll have them all over the country, so they have different humidities and
yes.
and dryness, and they just how they do the science, right? It's just experimentation.
Yep.
But I was like, I know what this is. I was like, because he's way too nonchalantly moving from body to body.
Yeah, he's just like walking around.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this must be. Well, I wrote dead body lab. Yeah, that was my word for it.
That's fair. Yep. We then have Jim Brass and Catherine arriving at the body farm. This is when we learn, or when we first hear it referred to as a body farm. We learn that the body that does not belong there has a gunshot wound to the chest. Then a carpet beetle walks out of his shirt. Grissom is freaking out about cross-contamination because this beetle shouldn't be on this corpse at this stage because it's like very freshly passed. Like he's been dead less than like 6 hours or something. Yeah. And so Grissom's like, cross-contamination, like get this body out of here, which brings us to credits. We then have our first walk and talk with Catherine and Sarah. And then they end up joining Nick and Warwick in the break room. This is where we learn that Grissom put one of his experiments, aka rancid blood, in the community fridge where they keep their food to eat, which is not A-okay.
This is the beginning of my very confused journey in this episode.
Okay. I feel like we are going to go on a confused journey together here.
Yeah, well, you probably have more down the road context than I do.
Yes, I do for sure.
Obviously, Grissom has quirks, and he's really just blind to some stuff. Like he's not.
Yes.
It would be inappropriate to say he's being intentional in these choices, right? But that doesn't mean.
But he's also not
learn.
Yes, but he's also. Himself. I was going to say he's also not making effort.
Yeah,
like he's not intentionally causing harm, but he's also not taking any actions to rectify situations in which he does cause harm.
Yeah, and he's not. But also, like, so the other portion of this is it begins a series of like, is the problem Grissom and everyone, or is the problem Grissom and Sarah through this episode? Like, is there an additional component separate from like Grissom doesn't treat Sarah maybe that much different than everybody else, and so I was trying to figure out, like, are they trying to provide additional subtext here, or is Sarah just being like the fulcrum to this storyline?
I will say that I think contained within this episode, that answer fluctuates, because in this scene, for example, Nick is like super upset about Grissom putting the rancid blood in the fridge. Like he's upset about these actions, but he opts to not say anything about it, to not really take a stand.
Yeah. He doesn't push.
He doesn't push, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a problem with Grissom, or that he's like totally okay with everything Grissom does. He isn't, but he's just not willing to push.
Yeah.
So Grissom enters. This is where we learned that the blood is past the expiration date. That's why they have it. He, again, sees no issue with leaving expired blood, rancid blood in the community fridge, but they all get paged, which kind of sends them off on their ways. Grissom is in with Doc Robbins. This is where we learn that there's no bullet fragments or exit wound on this victim, which is very strange. Catherine enters.
We learn this pin. Is that really just a pin for a rib? They never explain that.
We're going to get there in a minute. That actually doesn't happen here. That happens like very soon after. But they never really come back to it, to your point. Catherine enters. We learn that the victim is Mike Kimball. Warwick and Catherine then arrive at Kimball's house. On fire. Big explosion. Yeah. Jim Brass ends up talking to the neighbor. This is where we learn that he has a fiance and he spent a lot of time over his fiance's house, and that they can get the fiance's, once the woman can go back, it's clear to go back into her house, she can get the fiance's information because she has her name and address.
I paused and rewatched this scene to judge this neighbor and their acting abilities.
Oh, yeah.
So I could decide whether I thought they were going to be the person who committed the murder.
Yeah, you were like, are you it? Is it you?
I was like, what's this character? Why are they introducing this character just to say, why does she have the fiance's address? Like, what would the point to that?
I don't know. Like I like my neighbors. I get along well with my neighbors. They don't have like my mom's contact information.
You know, if her kids were staying there without her,
yes, then
for
I could
some
see
reason,
that. Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
but there's no real reason for that to happen.
No.
And later on, they say they mostly are at her house anyway, so it's like it's just really bizarre for her to have it. But also, maybe they were getting married, and then that's part of like, oh, here's our registry. Send your gifts to this address.
That's a good point.
You know,
Yeah, maybe that was
they
part
don't
of
say
it.
that, but
They don't, but that could be a good reasoning. So
again, hire me.
Yes, hire Nick as a writer. We go back to the scene that you were referencing with Doc Robbins and Grissom. They're excising the wound. This is when they find that metal fragment in the tract, which they never really come back to.
I thought they were gonna like tie this back to the eventual murder weapon or something, and it did come up, but I was like, did I miss something? On the rewatch, I was like, no.
You're like, nope, didn't miss it.
They never talk about it. It just doesn't exist.
Grissom during this exercise also finds a maggot that is only found in bovines. So it's very strange that this maggot is inside a human. And this just raises the question of like, oh, is this additional cross-contamination from the body farm? Because they also do experiments on animals at the body farm. So
this also causes a lot of confusion for me because they treat it like they found meat in the wound, but they never actually say they found meat.
They, spoiler alert, end up saying that it's nearly impossible to differentiate between the human tissue and the bovine tissue because of what we learn.
The experiment that Grissom does later, he's like, oh, did they bring the meat with it? And I was like, when did you say you actually found meat? You just found a larva. It's like, it was very confusing, but it also isn't even that important. Like everything else is still valid.
Yeah.
Everything else they do is still valid. But I think they may have cut something out. That's what I decided in the second watch through. I think
that's fair.
I was like,
this feels like an episode with like some loose ends that they for time just were like, no, we're just gonna like leave those dangling out there, and we don't really need to like put them in a nice little bow.
And all those like weird questions, they sort of start to dry up. So that's I think like maybe it's like, oh, we just trimmed a little here, trimmed a little there.
Yeah. We're then with Nick. He's entering the burned out home. Warwick is already there. We learn that the burn pattern is very strange in that like fire should burn up, but the pattern of this looks like the fire burned down, which is just not the natural flow of where fire is going to go. They, as they're kind of investigating this, also find a blood-soaked rug, and I had to laugh. This is where Nick goes, it must be a cover-up. You're just now thinking it's a cover-up? You found his dead body, and then you come to his house on fire and exploding, and only now, after you find a blood-soaked rug, are you like, cover-up time?
It's like you went there because you said it is the most likely place that
right, it's the most likely place. Nick's like, oh my gosh, I guess it's a cover-up. I'm like, no, really, you think?
Also, what happens to water destroys everything?
Not in this case. Not this water. This is special water.
No water
that averts itself around the rug. It's a water repellent rug. It just went right around it.
It's made of aluminum fibers.
Jim, Brass, and Catherine arrive at the. Oh, go ahead.
There's an important thing that happens in this episode. I wasn't sure if you were going to mention.
Oh, okay.
Or in this scene, I should say.
Yeah.
Is they talk about the I forget who's. I think Warwick or Nick
the percentage arsonists. Yes, 94% of arsonists are.
And
male.
Warwick's like, of course, Sarah would say something like that because it comes up again.
Yes, it does.
And I didn't realize this the first time I watched the episode. I didn't realize this the second time in the episode. I realized this just now, staring at my notes. Sarah was right.
A man set the fire.
Sarah was right. Because one of my notes in this episode is this another crap on Sarah Sidle episode?
Yeah. It feels like it. It feels like it.
There's a line later. I'll be curious if you call it out.
Okay.
If my partner was with me when I was watching this and she overheard it, she would have like, this is one of the things she cannot stand when people say this.
Yeah. Okay. So. All right. We'll see. So we're with Jim, Brass, and Catherine. They arrive at Jane's, the fiance's house. A teen girl or like a young girl answers the door, and they end up walking into the kitchen, talking to Jane. We learn that Mike was a photographer, which becomes very important throughout this episode. The ex-husband arrives. There's definitely tension there between the two of them. He ends up taking the kids.
I can never understand what the wife is saying. She says, he's like, can I take the kids?
She talks very like...
I listened to this line 20 times. I cannot tell you what she said.
I think she says they're in the foyer or they're in the living room or something like that.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
There's a couple other parts of the episode when she talks. I was like, thankfully, none of her dialogue is super important because I barely.
No, she like whisper. She like whisper talks.
Yeah,
is kind of like how she delivers her lines. Is she kind of like is very breathy and light about it. So
I have a spot the guest star for the Sun.
Oh, okay.
By the way.
Oh, all right.
Which isn't really from this scene because he doesn't really spend any time in front of the camera.
Yeah, but we might as well do it now. That's fine.
But he is his first appearance, and later on he spends a lot more time in front of the camera. And I was like, this kid is so familiar. When I looked at the end of the episode and I saw his picture on IMDb when he's 30 years older or something, 10 years older. I was like, I definitely know who this kid is. I was like, where do I know him from? And then I looked at his stuff and I was like, oh. He's the best friend in the movie Easy A, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. I found that movie so funny.
I've never seen that movie.
Oh, it's really great. It's a real sort of like comedic play on the Scarlet Letter, basically.
Okay.
And the A and Easy A. And the Easy is, insinuating that somebody is easy, and the A is the Scarlet Letter. There's also sort of a play on the idea of like an easy grade or something.
Okay. And so this is Dan Bird.
I don't know he's ever in anything else.
Oh, he's in a lot of other things. He's in Young Sheldon. He's in Utopia. He was in 102 episodes of Cougar Town. Which
I'm a little behind on Cougar Town.
Which evidently went on long enough to have at least 102 episodes of.
Apparently, still is Courtney Cox of Friends fame.
Yes, I know Courtney Cox. That's the only thing I know about that show is that Courtney Cox was in it. He was in 102 episodes of that.
Mm-hmm. Is this like someone's response to what's the show Felicity Huffman was in? And
Sex and the City?
Desperate Housewives.
Oh, yeah. We were just talking about that too. Funny.
It was, we had a person who was in it.
Yeah,
we did. Guest star.
Yeah, that was another spot the guest star.
There you go. So yeah, he's a little spot the guest star.
Okay.
And I didn't really recognize him when he like got something from the fridge and he wasn't allowed to have anything but an apple for some reason. Yeah. But then when he was being interrogated later on in the episode, spoiler alert.
He does get interrogated. This is true.
He may or may not have committed a crime, but I was like, I really do know who this person is.
You're like, no, I actually do legitimately know them.
But yeah, he's a little young for me to recognize. But
yeah, no, that is entirely fair. We return to the burned house. We're with Nick and Grissom. They're looking for the accelerant because they figure accelerant has to be involved. Then Grissom wanders into Mike's photography room and just like randomly pulls apart a photo frame.
It's like, again, you're in a fire. There's this untouched thing.
But this whole room is untouched. It's not like the room is burned down and just this one little picture frame remains. His entire photography room is untouched.
He's just drawn to this frame.
He's drawn to the frame, which has a very cute picture of Mike and Jane and the two kids. But Grissom feels this urge to take it apart, and then that's where he finds very inappropriate pictures of the daughter hidden behind this picture frame.
Which I know that's where I would keep my
that's exactly. Photos. Yep, that's 100% where you would keep said salacious photos. This brings us to Catherine and Jim Brass with the mother. She does not believe that Mike assaulted her daughter. Catherine then talks to the daughter, Jody, directly with the mother there. Catherine's like sort of trying to get her to answer questions. She's not being forthcoming, but she does say that like she loved Mike, he loved me.
Which does not help his case, by the way.
No, but we
that
also
is not the note you wanted to end on.
But we don't know this until later in the episode, but she's only 12 years old.
Yes. Yeah, she does not look 12. I'm sure the actress was not 12.
I'm sure the actress was not 12. But we later on learn that the character is 12 years old, and so she probably does not have the wherewithal to understand that could be an implicating statement for Mike. So Catherine talks to Jim Brass, talks about how, the daughter clammed up. Jody's not willing to say anything. Poor Warwick again gets stuck doing like one job the entire episode. So Warwick is processing an image of Jody. Nick points out that there looks to be a finger in like one corner of the photo, which Nick points out like, oh, isn't that weird that a professional photographer would capture his finger his finger in the frame. Sorry guys, cold medication. It's been great. And so we then are with Grissom with a bunch of ground beef, and some flies. Sarah enters. We learn that the ex-husband owns a handgun, so Grissom wants to see the handgun. And Sarah is asking Grissom, like, hey, like, are you going to tell me anything about it? Because Grissom's like, okay, I'm gonna peace out now. And Sarah's like, aren't you going to tell me anything about the case? Like, we're supposed to be working this together, and, you're not really acting like we're working it together. And his response to this is basically, clean up after me.
Hey, you want to help clean up my mess?
Yep.
This is a great example of me disrespectful. However, I have a lot of things I want to talk about in this scene.
Okay.
Sticking with Sarah, she is uncomfortably close to Grissom's. She is like pressing herself up against his arm. And I can only assume it's a bad like shot composition. And they're you have to get closer. You're not in frame. Yeah. But that's where like a lot of the like, is she supposed to be hitting on Grissom?
Yeah, like, is that what's going on?
I was like, I can't figure out what this episode is trying to tell me about these two characters. But also, it took me forever to figure out what the heck he was trying to figure out with his like picnic tent in ground
I have no
beef.
idea. I have no clue what he's trying to figure out in this.
I think he was trying to figure out if the flies are getting meat on them, and so they could carry them from the cow corpse to the human corpse. And that's why it was like they must have found meat, but they must have found meat in the cow, but they didn't actually say they found meat, right? It's just like a fly landed there and laid a bug for some reason, unlikely. It was just so, that's where I said, like, I feel like if we had that one other piece of evidence in the middle, we stitch it together,
it would have helped.
And then seriously, anybody who's watched this episode, go back and watch it. Sarah is like person hitting on you at a bar or like adult dancer at a nightclub, like pushing herself up against Grissom in this scene. And I was like, what is about to happen?
Yeah. What?
And then it's just like, and then obviously again, apparently crap on Sarah episode.
Yep. Oh yeah. This is definitely a crap on Sarah episode for sure.
And
which we do not condone, listeners. We don't condone. We like Sarah.
We're on Team Sidle.
We're on
side Sidle.
Side Sidle.
It's like
we are on
side saddle almost.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. But yeah, the whole like not knowing she's a vegetarian, a great callback to the dead pig episode.
Yes, I did like. Right? I did like that they brought up a very memorable scene in an earlier episode.
But yeah, it's like Grissom doesn't notice these things about anyone, I guess. But like, really, it's important to Sarah that she doesn't notice them about her. So it's interesting. It obviously is important later on in the episode. But
yes, it is. Yes,
it's definitely culminating.
Yes, yep, entirely. Jim Brass is in with the ex-husband. Jim Brass just giving details away on the case, just telling the ex-husband about the pictures of his daughter, the inappropriate pictures of his daughter. And
last episode, we had a murder suspect extracting information from the police.
Yes.
Being buddy-buddy with them.
Yes. Here we go again. Just giving Jim Brass is just like, here you go. We didn't just deal with this recently. Jim
Brass is like, I know what it's like to have an estranged relationship with my daughter.
Yeah, let me help you out here. Grissom walks over. He examines the ex-husband is there because he's bringing in his gun. Grissom walks over. examines the gun. It's been cleaned recently. Then we go to Sarah writing. We don't see what she's writing. We learn later in the episode what it is, but we just kind of see her writing. Warwick walks over. This is where we learn that the accelerant used is nail polish remover. We then have a short scene with like a doctor examining Jodie. She has a burn on her wrist that she's saying comes from a curling iron. And then we go to Grissom looking at a bullet. He's like examining it. He like takes a sip of a drink. He puts his drink down. He looks over and he sees the ice melting. This
I thought it was
stirs
gonna
something.
Be an ice bullet.
It sort of is. Like, it's kind of. It is partial ice bullet. It's not fully ice bullet, but it is partial ice bullet. This brings us to Grissom in the break room. He is continuing experimenting with beef in a different way. Now it's not under like a little trap. He's like taking the beef and smushing it and forming it into something. Catherine enters.
Thing he's using, I mean, I guess most people would know, but it's
like, I would not know it. That's why I didn't.
So yeah, it's like like put lead bullets into to like form bullets out of them.
Okay, like I knew because of I knew the answer to the episode, but I didn't know in a everyday sort of way. So I didn't want to say it and be like, I don't know, like because I wouldn't have known what this was, other than I just know how this episode ends.
If you were a Revolutionary War member, you would probably be smelting, lead into
that makes sense
into bullet balls and or, I don't know, maybe Civil War or something. But I mean, throughout the episode, Grissom appears to have at the ready tens of thousands of dollars worth of custom bullet making equipment.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Nothing suspicious there. That shouldn't raise any red flags. Catherine enters. We learn that Jodie has suffered from chronic sexual abuse, but Catherine also is then willing to claim that she's the arsonist.
Yeah.
And Grissom's like, look, let's hold off on that. Like, let's do a little bit more digging, which Grissom, you don't make a lot of good decisions in this episode. Solid decision on this front.
You got to follow the evidence.
Yeah. So, because of the finding of the doctor's exam, Nick and Catherine are at the mother's house. They have a warrant. Nick finds a stained nightgown. They're leaving, and they're like, hey, Jodie's going to go with a foster parent. Jim Brass arrives. We learn that Mike was actually no longer her fiancé. Like, they had called the wedding off, and she's trying to say she just got cold feet, like when she was going to marry her ex-husband, you couldn't find anybody happier, and now they can barely stand to be anywhere near each other, and she was just worried about making that same mistake again. But both Jim Brass and Catherine are insinuating that she must have had an idea that Mike was abusing her daughter, and that's what caused the dissolution of their marriage.
It's not like she was like, oh, I have cold feet, I don't know if they canceled their wedding.
Yeah, they canceled the wedding. Yeah. This wasn't like, oh, I'm not sure we're going to go through with it. They canceled the wedding.
That is of itself a little incriminating. So.
Yeah, and I think the episode does it on purpose, right? To get you to believe a certain truth before they actually reveal what's going on.
Call that a red herring.
Yes. We're then with the entire team with Greg Sanders. This is nothing against the actor who plays Greg Sanders. This is another, I think, horrible writing choice that makes Greg Sanders look awful. Like, hey, Greg Sanders, be comedic relief in an episode where there really shouldn't be comedic relief.
The absolute worst part about this is the part where they're like, hey, this is like an underage thing, and he's like, okay, I'll be more serious, and then he still plays the game.
Yeah, still plays the game.
You know the answer. Just tell. Why'd you have to call everyone in here?
It's again, it is nothing against the actor who plays Greg Sanders. I think this is a really poor writing choice to try to pigeonhole this character into a certain role in the show, and this is just not the episode for it.
It's a lot of. I really question a lot of the directing choices in this episode, and I don't know.
Yeah, this could be a directing too.
Very well to like be like, oh, that's they directed this episode or this other thing, or to know if that's like common or not. But like, I kind of gotta start paying attention. I think more to who the directors are, because sometimes like that often has a big the writers are not that varied in the show. And
writers there are Anthony Zeiker and Ann Donahue, which have been regular writers.
Yeah, the character portrayals are sometimes all over the place.
Yeah.
And they're very caricature sometimes. And I feel like a lot of times I was like, is that the director? He's like, I want to shoot the scene like this. I think this would be funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The whole scene could have just been
here's the result.
Two of them, here's the result. It's not this, it's not this, it's this. And then they're like, oh, I have this idea. What if we print out these pieces of paper that say in giant bold lighting, 100% not a match?
Yeah. So we learn in this very awkward scene that the match is to her brother, which no one saw coming. We're then with Jim Brass, with the brother and his parents. He's claiming innocence. We go back to work, continuing to work on the picture. Grissom enters. This is where they have a conversation about how eyes are windows to the soul. So, Warwick's like, oh, maybe actually I can run some algorithms and maybe get some data from the reflection in her eyes, which, spoiler alert, becomes fruitful.
Also, zero chance you could ever do that. You'd be much better off getting a giant magnifying glass.
Yeah, I know.
And looking at like the print.
I know. I was like, this is definitely one of those like CSI magic moments and not actual. Jim Brass and Nick are then with Jake and his advocate. He's still claiming innocence. This is where Nick asks to talk to Jake alone, which somehow the advocate's like, yeah, sure, that's fine.
Yeah, so, I was like, isn't your job to say no?
Literally.
Also, they waited questions before the advocate got there.
Yeah, they waited there for the advocate before they started like the legit questioning, I guess. And then as soon as he gets there, Nick's like, "Can I talk to him alone?" The advocate's like, "Yeah, that's fine. That makes sense. That's okay." But the reason that they talk alone is so that Nick can have the everybody masturbates conversation with Jake, which we didn't go to the same school system in, like elementary and all that fun stuff. So for me, and I will never forget this, our program to learn sex about ed. Our bodies changing and sex ed and all that sort of stuff was called LAMO, learning about myself and others.
Okay. I don't know what mine was called, but
ours was called LAMO.
In the 6th grade, I went to a Catholic middle school.
Oh.
And we went to a different Catholic middle school.
Yeah.
And 6th graders from that class and the 6th graders from our class got together, and then we got split into the boys' room, the girls' room.
Yep.
And went through a bunch of stuff. But I'm pretty sure by that point, like almost everyone in those classes were basically already in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like we're already sexually maturing. So it was a little late to the game.
Yeah, I think LAMO for us started in like 3rd grade.
Yeah. I don't think
not this part of it, but like the So
I will say, I kind of knew exactly where this was going.
Did you?
But yeah, because it's, first off, you're not committing crimes and they're just throwing it on the top of the hamper.
Yeah.
Mike has been dead for days.
Yes.
And for this to just be there, it's like, all right. So clearly, mom would be doing the laundry. So it's like, yeah, this is going to be one of those incidental weird things. And
to throw you off the course, but then bring us back in.
I was at one point in my life a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah, so you were like, oh, fair enough.
When you're figuring stuff out, it's weird, and you do all sorts of dumb stuff because you're a 13-year-old and you're a boy. Yeah,
and that's basically what we learned. We also learned that he was cool with Mike. He thought he was a decent guy. He didn't think that there was anything inappropriate going on. Mm-hmm. Then we go to Grissom.
Although again with she's always so excited to see Mike. They really wanted you to think that the two of them were hooking up.
Yes, they did.
And maybe they were, and we just don't know about it.
Well,
they didn't definitively say it wasn't happening.
Yeah, I think the idea is that it wasn't.
Although she didn't really seem that broken up by Mike being gone.
Well, I think we'll get there, because I think they sort of have an explanation for that. So we then go to Grissom expending his meat bullet.
Also a thing 13-year-olds boys do.
This is a true story. I had to write this down, and I was like, this is what they said. So I'm just gonna write it down. Doc Robbins arrives. Doc Robbins arrives to be a part of this. So, this is a very progressive workplace here. Then And they realize that like the entry wound and like the track looks similar, so it's definitely a possibility for the like wound that they found on the victim. Jim, Brass, and Grissom are then with the ex-husband. This is where they let him know, like, hey, you cleaned your gun, but you didn't clean your reloader, and we found beef.
I also love that Brass has to like explain what a reloader is.
Yes.
Because I don't think, again, I wouldn't expect a person to know what that is, right? And obviously the person you're talking to knows exactly what you're talking about.
So yeah, he knows. The audience. Yeah. Oh yeah, this was definitely like, hey audience, wink wink, nudge nudge, this is what a reloader is.
But presumably he used it to fabricate said meat bullet and thought to clean his gun, but not his the thing he produced the bullet with.
Right? Yes. He then basically admits to the crime and admits to never feeling comfortable around Mike. And then we have this like flashback of Mike admitting that he assaulted Jody to the ex-husband. He wants to make a formal confession. He's like, yep, I'm willing to say that I killed him. We have very short...
I don't really get, but...
I think we sort of we'll circle back to this. Yeah. I think we sort of kind of get why he does this. So very short Jim, Brass, and Grissom walk and talk moment. We then have Sarah entering I was going to say Greg's office, not Greg, Grissom's office. And we learned that what she was writing was a request for a leave of absence. And she's saying that she needs this because she needs a different work environment. She needs, communication. She needs respect. And Grissom just cannot help but shove his shoe right in his mouth and is like, oh, is this about the hamburger thing? And Sarah fairly is like, no, like, what? I can't believe that you are trying to whittle this down to like one singular like quirk / instance instead of being willing to open up your eyes and see the bigger picture.
Which is a great line. I really like that line.
I thought it was a very good line and well delivered and I think poignant. So yeah, I had to highlight that. I was like, quote unquote hamburger thing. Grissom and Catherine. This is where we learned that the ex-husband is basically out on bail. He's not going to really see any time because what jury is going to convict him when he, killed this guy for abusing his daughter. And I think that this is where he didn't want them to investigate any further. So he was willing to be like, yep, I did it. And I'm willing to make a formal complaint or a formal admission of guilt because
usually
I don't think that is true. But he's like, I don't think I'm, I think he figured out I'm probably not going to see much time if this is how they see the story.
Yeah.
And so I think he wanted them to stop any further investigation because he was just like, this is a good storyline for me. I am like I'm the amazing hero father that killed the guy abusing his daughter. Right.
Yeah, stop looking at evidence.
Right. Like stop looking at things. This is the story I want to have told. So that's my take on it.
I was very unclear at this point if the parents knew about the photographs.
The ex-husband did, because Jim Brass told him about them.
Okay, yeah. So it's like, right, because then he was like, oh yeah.
And then they've been talking to the wife and the mother about like Mike abusing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they both know. In the scene, Catherine also confirms that the burn that Jody has is from a curling iron. So it looks like she is not, in fact, the arsonist. Warwick continues to work on the picture. Poor Warwick just gets put on a task and just doesn't get alas, poor Warwick. Nick enters. This is where we realize that the reflection in her eye is a porthole. So the pictures were taken on a boat. Warwick then talks to Miss Bradley, the mother, and he like everybody else, is still very hyper-focused on Mike being responsible. So he's like, hey, does Mike have a boat? Does Mike have any access to a boat? And she's like, no, he doesn't have a boat. And she goes, but he did want to ask my ex-husband to borrow his, but he was like, he had too much pride to do that. He wouldn't do that. Ex-husband has a boat. He got it right after their divorce, which is weird I guess it's not weird to, I I think generally speaking, after divorces, people lose money. So it's weird to make like a very large purchase right after a divorce. Like, I find that to be strange, but
they don't. I mean, he owns a number of stores.
I've never been divorced, so I don't know.
He owns a number of businesses. I guess the implication is
grocery
he has
stores.
Money.
Yeah.
Right. So he's paying his alimony. He's still got money left over for a boat. He's still got a fancy lawyer.
Yeah.
We get the lawyer. His lawyer in this episode was in another episode, I think, also representing somebody who is very wealthy.
Yes. Yeah. This is not the public attorney lawyer in this this episode. So Warg is then entering a boat. He's going onto a boat, sees a porthole, takes a picture of the porthole. Catherine is then back with Jody. This is where they're starting to talk to her about knowing that her dad was the one who took the pictures. And we obviously will have a warning before this episode. Like, this is a very heavy and very tough episode. And this is probably, at least for me, one of the hard, like, even both times I watched it this time, I was like, oh, like it was so hard for me to listen to, is when she's talking about how he said it was basically like having her mom again.
Yeah. It took me a second to realize where they were trying to go with that, because they said it in such a weird way.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's absolutely and then like photos, and I think the photo thing, did we kind of gloss over the Mike gave her the camera and then the camera was back at Mike's house, and that's one of the ways they started to. There's a whole thing when Grissom perked his ears up when
I think we did skip over that. This was I will admit that this was a hard one for me to take notes on, because I'm not feeling the best, but it's also just a difficult episode to take notes on because it moves around quite a bit, and there's a lot of scenes that are very similar, and so it's hard to be like, wait, did this happen in this scene, or was this like this other scene that was sort of like this?
They kind of ask her, I think, about it in the scene, and she just clams up, or she does a good job of that.
Yes.
Like fearful silence.
Yes.
Right?
And this is, speaking of silence, Catherine is saying like, hey, we have this evidence, but these cases are very hard to prove, which sadly is very true. And so Catherine's trying to get her to agree to testify. And she's saying like, there's no way I'm going to do that. My dad said that he would kill me if I talked. And I told Mike, and Mike said he was going to fix it, and now Mike is and he killed Mike,
which gives us like the real motive. They don't do a flashback, a real one.
No, they don't do a real flashback of it.
Although it's also premeditated, most likely, since he had to make a meat bullet.
Yes. This was definitely not like he tried to pass it off as a
passion.
Yeah, a moment. It's like, okay, what else are you making meat bullets for, other than to murder someone and hopefully leave no trace of a bullet behind? Like, you're not going hunting with like a random beef bullet like out in the woods. Like, there's no reason for that. So Warwick enters. He's carrying this big paper bag. We don't know what's in it. We learn very, very soon after. I wrote down what was in it because I knew, and then I was like, I crossed it out because I was like, to be fair, we don't know in this scene. But he does ask Catherine, like, hey, she's under 14, right? And Catherine's like, yeah, she's only 12. This is where we didn't know this earlier. We obviously knew that she was like underage and a minor, and all of this was very inappropriate, but she's 12. So then Jim Brass and Grissom are with the ex-husband and his high-paid attorney. We learn that what was inside of the brown bag was a sleeping bag, and that sleeping bag, when they like turned it inside out, had a mixture of fluids, contributors, daughter and father. And I will give the actor credit here because he's such a creep, and he's like so good at being such a creep. He's just like, with like no remorse, no like, oh man, they figured this out. And not even like so to a level of no remorse that even when he was caught, he's still like, he's not even putting on a front of caring about what happened. Like, he is just like, hey, make me a deal. Like, he goes to his lawyer and he's like, hey, make me a deal. I don't, like,
okay, what's the next step in getting me out of this?
Yes. And that was it. Like, that was his only focus and they tell him, no such deal. Like, Nevada has a statute of, sexual assault against a minor under the age of 14 is mandatory life sentence, no possibility of parole. So there's no deal to be had here. So he managed to only get 4 years for murder, but he is going away for life for assaulting his daughter, as he should. As he should.
I had this thought, like, it's one of those things where, like, certain crimes they're so heinous, you are doing something to a person, like, they have to deal with it for their whole life. Like, sometimes in that situation, life without parole is more appropriate, right?
Yeah.
And it's you can't, like, measure it to the life of the person, because first off, we don't ever want to incentivize someone to kill someone. But
very true.
You know what I mean?
We're not encouraging you, listeners.
It also ensures that the survivor doesn't have to ever face their accuser in any way, shape, or form.
There's no possibility of parole. So there's no having to go in front of a parole board every 5 to 10 years and make your case of why you don't think that this person should be released.
And that's, I think, what they were trying to hype up is so important about Warwick asking about her age, was like, that's what pushed it into that category.
Yeah.
And that's what, we may have gotten him for murder, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Right.
He's going to prison for the rest of his life anyway.
Yep. So they take him away. Catherine then approaches the mom in the hallway. She apologizes. The mom is very understanding and is like, hey, you were just looking out for my daughter. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Basically no hard feelings for spending the entire episode saying that my fiance / not quite a fiance is a total dirtbag. When he was not, when he actually was, like, being a really good guy.
Yeah, he was, in fact, it's almost more tragic because he sounds like he would have been a great father to these children.
Yes, because it sounds like he would have been a really wonderful father figure to these two children. So, but she's understanding of where Catherine was coming from, holds no ill will. They leave. We then go to Catherine and Grissom at what we assume is Grissom's apartment. This is just not a good Grissom episode.
No.
So Catherine is like, oh, so I heard about, what happened between you and Sarah. Grissom's response, oh, that's Sarah. She gets very emotional.
So that's the line that I referred to earlier. There's this is a very real thing that I have observed. I have heard, like, firsthand, I guess, really accounts of it. It's very down-putting and inappropriate to call somebody emotional because they have feelings or because they're passionate about something.
Right.
I was like, it's like everybody is different as human beings, and you're trying to belittle their experiences.
And she handled this professionally.
Yeah.
She wrote up a formal request of leave of absence. She delivered it to him. She wasn't, like, screaming and throwing things and, being belligerent. She was just like, hey, here's what I need. Here's why I need it. Have a good day. And Grissom's response is like, oh, that's Sarah. To see how emotional she is.
The lab needs you. It's not about you, Grissom.
Oh my gosh.
Don't worry. You can always buy her flowers.
A plant. He goes to order her flowers, and then he's like, oh no, she likes them alive, so I want you to deliver a plant and not flowers.
Back to her being a vegetarian, because I don't know if you know how vegetarianism
works. Yeah, it's not quite the same.
But you don't keep plants alive. You keep animals alive.
I'm like,
I bought her a puppy.
Yeah. Oh God, don't listeners, don't buy anybody puppies. Don't
buy anyone a pet.
No.
Unless you're in a committed relationship
with them. And you, like, talk about it extensively and you agree upon it. Yeah.
And you're prepared to make it your pet if they don't want it.
Yeah. 100%. Don't go out and just get people pets willy-nilly. But he calls, orders her a plant, and he decides to put on the card from Grissom.
So like, thoughtful and, really solving all of her concerns. Also, I'm glad you said it to the office, because you're presuming that she's coming back to work after she just asked for a leave of absence. Not to, like, her home, whose address you should at least be able to spend 5 seconds looking up if you don't know it,
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I can look up my employees' addresses if I needed to.
Yeah. It's just the most it's almost like his response is worse.
Oh, it's so bad. Nothing. It's so bad.
I wanted to watch the next episode immediately.
You're like, I need to know. I need to know what happens.
I was like, that's the one good thing this episode came away with, is it made me want to watch the next episode.
Well, before we get there, Nick, what did you think about today's episode?
It had its ups and downs. There were parts of this episode I really liked, and then there were just a lot of crummy parts of this episode, dated parts of this episode.
Yes.
And then, but like, as I said, you got to give him some credit if you maybe want to watch the next episode, which I don't, it's not like I've watched these episodes that I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch the next one.
Yeah, like, oh, I got to watch another one next week.
A lot of times it's late at night. I want to go to bed. I was kind of just want to watch the next one, but I can't. I'm committed to the format. And so I was like, but that's good. That's like the good sign. Yeah. A good sign in a TV show. And I think that this episode I could have liked a way more if there were just maybe a little better. There was directing or it's editing or something. Yeah. But other things, I did reserve. I have a whole section of my notes for Science with Nick that I decided not to dive into. Okay. I felt I was getting a little too nitpicky in this while recording. Yeah. So yeah, there were definitely enough things to make me go, but also it was good. You didn't really know. I felt that they kept lots of avenues very plausible.
Yes.
Which I like. Like, I think that makes an important part of the episode. As long as they don't cheat to get there. They bend the rules with, oh, she burned herself on a curling line. Oh, I had cold feet. We canceled the wedding. Yeah. There are a lot of farcical ways in which they kept it interesting. But even between Mike, I mean, I wrote down that it could have been Dad early on, and I couldn't tell you, right? There was enough to go one way or the other. I think I kind of got off Dad when the sexual assault came into play, and which is exactly probably what they wanted me to do.
I think that's exactly what they wanted you to do.
Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't bad. It's definitely not at the top of my list. We'll see how it shakes at the end of the season, but it's definitely not at the bottom either.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a middle of the road episode for me. Not the worst, not the best. I think, as you mentioned, there's weird writing and or directorial choices here that I just can't back up. Again, I think they are trying to pigeonhole Greg Sanders into this like wacky, zany, comedic relief guy. Powers. And this is just not the episode for it. Like, this is just no. And again, nothing against the actor who plays Greg Sanders. I think this was a writing and or directing decision that fell way off the mark. I also don't like that, again, they basically shunned Warwick to the basement and just had him like work on one singular piece of evidence the entire time and not really be heavily involved in the case until the very, very end. And even then, still like, he's not in any of the interrogations. He's not. I don't know why they keep pushing Warwick to the side. I think he's a very interesting character, and that's very frustrating.
His plot is a Mad Lib. It goes, Warwick is in the break room reading the newspaper, ignoring everyone, and then randomly chiming in. And then Warwick spends the entire episode chasing this one piece of evidence.
They keep doing this to work, and I don't like it. And obviously how they treat Sarah in this episode is just abysmal, and I just cannot stand behind it. But from my remembrance of watching this for the first time, I don't think that I figured out until much later in the episode what was really going on. So I do think that it does, if you're watching it for a first time, it does a very good job of keeping you on your toes and like not knowing what is going to be coming up. So
although they did this with Warwick before, where he spends the entire episode on something and you don't know, you don't know the answer, and they basically have nothing until he solves that one puzzle.
Yes,
then it's over like that.
Yes, he is like the linchpin. Like, he's the one that comes in and is like, here's that like one thing that we need to actually solve the case. But I don't like that that's
Warwick ex machina.
Yeah, I just don't like that that's sacrificing him having any character development or having more screen time. Yep. Like, yes, it's great that like he basically is solving the case, but I don't like that it's at the expense of like not having him have more dialogue.
Yeah, or do more real like science.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, it's like, oh, I've been working on this thing for like all day, and then all of a sudden it's like 4 buttons he pushes.
Yeah, it's like boop, boop, boop.
It's like the time sync isn't there either.
No.
So yeah, it's good. This episode did make me feel very dated though.
It's
with its technology.
Yeah.
People reading the newspaper. Teenage girl talking to her friends on her cordless
on the cordless phone.
Yeah. You know, the only thing the Walkman, the son was running around the house with his Walkman on.
Yep.
Sony Discman or something.
Yep. Definitely a dated episode in quite a few ways, but we'll see if our next episode is as dated when we return with season 2, episode 16, Primum non nocere.
Oh my! I never look at these, so every time you say the episode, I'm hearing it for the first time.
I'm saying that with like it has no accents above any of the letters, but I'm acting like it does.
All right. I have some bonus content for us right now.
Okay.
This whole episode, it's called Burden of Proof. For most of the episode, I thought they were gonna like struggle to get like the guy kept destroying the evidence. Like everywhere the beginning of the episode, it's like, oh, we don't have evidence. It was contaminated by here. Is this that? I thought that was gonna really come into play. No. And it never, because it was the name of the episode, and it never did. And so now I'm like, all right, I'm gonna stop paying attention to the episode names for real.
Yeah. So
bonus content there.
Next one is Primum non nocere. But in the meantime, you can find us on... Well, you can support us on Patreon at Who Are You, a CSI Podcast. You can also find us on Facebook at Who Are You, a CSI Podcast. We are also on Twitter /X, Instagram, and Threads at Who Are You, CSI Pod. You can also email us at whoareyoucsipod@gmail.com. But in the meantime, we will talk to you next week.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.